When my son Ethan was born, I remember holding him for the first time and feeling this overwhelming wave of love and responsibility. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and in that moment, I silently promised myself that I would give him everything I could to help him become the best version of himself. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that years later, I would be calling him Dr. Ethan Hayes, and not just out of pride, but because he truly earned it. Ethan grew up in a small suburban neighborhood in Oregon. We weren't a wealthy family, but we were happy. I worked as a school librarian, and my husband, Daniel, was a high school history teacher. We weren't people of extravagant means, but we believed in hard work, kindness, and education. Ethan was a curious child from the start. While other kids his age would get bored with puzzles, Ethan would sit for hours putting together the most complicated ones we could find. By the time he was in middle school, Ethan had developed a fascination with how the human body worked. It started when his grandmother fell ill. She was diagnosed with a heart condition, and Ethan, only 12 at the time, sat beside her in the hospital asking the doctors endless questions. I remember being slightly embarrassed at first, thinking he might be bothering them, but to my surprise, the doctors welcomed his curiosity. One of them, Dr. Reynolds, even told me later, "Your son's got a sharp mind. You should encourage that." From that day, Ethan began reading every book about medicine he could get his hands on. I would often find him in the library after school, completely absorbed in thick medical textbooks that most adults would struggle to understand. He'd underline words, make flashcards, and explain concepts to me as though I were one of his students. High school was where he truly began to shine. Ethan wasn't just smart, he was compassionate. He volunteered at the local nursing home, spending his weekends reading to residents, helping staff serve meals, and learning about the everyday challenges older adults faced. The staff often joked that Ethan would one day run the place. When college applications came around, there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Ethan would pursue medicine. He was accepted into Stanford University, and I'll never forget the day the acceptance letter arrived. He ran into the living room, waving the envelope like it was a golden ticket. "Mom, I'm in," he shouted, his eyes sparkling with a kind of excitement you only see in someone who's about to live their dream. Stanford was a challenge, of course, but Ethan was built for it. He spent countless nights studying, sometimes calling me in the early hours of the morning to tell me about a breakthrough he'd had in understanding a complex anatomy concept. I'd often remind him to sleep, but he'd laugh and say, "I can sleep later, Mom. Right now, I'm learning how to save lives." The real test of his skills came during his third year of medical school. He had joined a summer program in rural Montana, where access to advanced medical facilities was limited. One afternoon, while shadowing a senior doctor at a small clinic, a young boy was rushed in after a severe bicycle accident. There was bleeding, broken bones, and the kind of panic that fills a room when a child's life is at stake. Ethan later told me that everything he had studied seemed to click into place at that moment. While the supervising doctor worked on stabilizing the boy's breathing, Ethan quickly began applying pressure to control the bleeding. He directed a nurse to prepare supplies for stitching while keeping his voice calm and steady. The boy's parents stood in the corner, crying, but Ethan reassured them with quiet confidence. "We're doing everything we can. He's going to be okay." The senior doctor later told me, if Ethan hadn't acted as quickly and decisively as he did, that boy might not have made it. I don't think I've ever felt prouder or more aware that my son wasn't just studying to be a doctor. He was becoming one. After graduating from medical school, Ethan began his residency in emergency medicine. Life as a resident is notoriously difficult. Long hours, unpredictable cases, and the constant emotional weight of dealing with life and death situations. Yet every time I called him, his voice was full of purpose. "It's hard, Mom," he'd admit, "but it's worth it." There was one case he shared with me that I'll never forget. A middle-aged man was brought into the ER after collapsing at work. The situation was dire. His heart had stopped. Ethan and his team immediately began CPR, and while others were losing hope, Ethan refused to give up. He performed chest compressions for what felt like an eternity, his arms aching, sweat dripping down his forehead. Finally, the heart monitor beeped, A steady rhythm returned. The man's wife later found Ethan in the hallway, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him. "You gave me my husband back," she whispered. Ethan didn't know what to say. He just nodded, humbled. "That's the kind of doctor my son is. Not one who chases prestige or wealth, but one who sees every patient as a human being deserving of dignity and care." Of course, his journey hasn't been without sacrifice. There were birthdays he missed, holidays he spent at the hospital, and moments where exhaustion nearly broke him. But every time I look at him, I see the little boy who once sat beside his grandmother's bed, eager to learn, full of empathy. That little boy has grown into a man who changes lives every day. One evening, I had to visit the hospital myself for a routine checkup. As I waited in the lobby, I watched Ethan from across the room. He didn't see me. He was too focused on speaking with an elderly patient, crouching slightly so he could be at eye level. He was smiling warmly, listening intently, and the patient was laughing despite the four in her arm. At that moment, it hit me all over again. My son is a very skillful young doctor. But more importantly, he's a good man. And that, I believe, is his greatest achievement. Even now, whenever I hear his name announced over the hospital intercom, Dr. Ethan Hayes to the ER, my heart swells with pride. Not because he's my son, but because the world is a better place with him in it. Sometimes people ask me how it feels to have raised such a successful child. My answer is simple. It feels like a blessing. Ethan may have inherited our values of hard work and compassion, but the drive, the dedication, and the skill, that's all him.